Hey, Injustice in America, CJ3450. Today is the last video for you guys to watch. And it deals with the final chapter in terms of summarizing the class and talking about some of the helpful reforms that might make things better. So go through these PowerPoint slideshows and finish reading the final chapter. Your final exam date has been announced, and you'll have full day from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Try that one time. You have 2 hours once you open it. Your study guide's online as well. So definitely contact me if you have any questions about any of that, right? So going to the summary, the last PowerPoint slideshow. We started with the basics. We said the United States declared its independence from Great Britain with the Declaration of Independence, and we founded our government first with the Articles of Confederation, but ultimately the U.S. Constitution. This is like high school civics, right? But we looked at the specific virtues or values that are laid out in each of these documents. Life, liberty, happiness, equality. Liberty, peace, domestic tranquility, well-being or general welfare, safety or common defense, justice, right? These are the principles that criminal justice ideally will try to uphold. That's what we said in terms of the ideals of criminal justice. But then we looked at the realities all semester long in terms of how things really work. So which of the following have been demonstrated? You can read through these. You can listen as well. Just like make a note, yes or no. Did I demonstrate that worms make up the law? Worms write the law. These are people who are not representative of the general public, right? White, older, rich men. Lawmakers are voted for by a group of people that are also not representative of the general public. Remember? I demonstrate that. Voters don't represent the average person. Most people don't regularly vote. Remember that? And then we looked at the special interests that influence the law, right? Lobbyists, political action committees, super PACs, interest groups, right? All those groups. I showed you, right, that whoever spends the most money on political campaigns is most likely to win. That money also doesn't come from quote unquote regular folks. It comes from those groups that I mentioned, very powerful groups. Are these things that I demonstrated over the course of the semester and in your book? Okay, so then given that, is it surprising that the term crime is not used to label the most serious threat to our lives and property? Yes, street crime is serious, absolutely, but it's not the most serious. Remember, serious means those things that happen the most and do the most harm. Isn't that white collar and corporate crime? Isn't that elite deviance rather than street crime? So did I show you that serious crimes are those crimes committed on the streets of America? But far more dangerous acts of elite deviance are either not illegal or not considered serious? Okay. Well then, if that's true, what about life? What about domestic tranquility? What about the general welfare? What about the common defense? If we're failing to protect people from the things that most threaten us, aren't we failing to meet our ideals? That's the argument. I showed you that media coverage of crime is focused disproportionately on street crime, especially violent crime and crime committed by people of color. Remember that? And then we looked at police, and you saw the police, because they're located in the inner cities of America and they're focused on street crime almost exclusively, right? So they're more likely to stop, question, detain, arrest, use force against people of color. That's what we call innocent bias. So what about liberty? What about equality? If the police um, are disparate in their treatment of people, if they're treating people differently based on their color, based on their class, what about liberty? What about equality? Those ideals. Then we looked at the courts and we saw that the power in the courtroom workgroup is biased in favor of the prosecution. And we looked at how pretrial and trial processes seem to be biased in favor of the wealthy. There's some significant biases by race and class and things like charging and plea bargaining, if you remember that from chapter 6. You see who's most likely to end up on probation, in jail, and prison, right? You see some biases in the death penalty in terms of race of victim bias. And then we also focused on the war on drugs and the death penalty as well. And we saw some significant biases there in terms of costs and how the war is fought, right? And how the death penalty is carried out. If all those things are true, if these are things that I was able to demonstrate to you, then what about our ideals of liberty and equality? What about protecting people's rights equally? Does that mean that the realities of criminal justice don't match the ideals? That's been the argument of the whole class, right? So then, is this a fair conclusion from everything you've heard? Criminal justice system or network does not achieve its goals of reducing crime and doing justice. It doesn't achieve its goals of reducing crime because it doesn't even focus on the crimes that are most dangerous. It doesn't achieve its goal of doing justice because it doesn't hold the most accountable, violent, dangerous people accountable under any way, right? It doesn't capture them, convict them, and send them to prison. And then we have these biases, these racial and social class biases that are a threat to justice as well. So is it a fair conclusion to say the criminal justice system or network as a whole is biased against certain groups of society? If so, if you believe that, again, you don't have to, that means that our criminal justice system or network, the realities of it are different than the ideals. That the things we supposedly believe in and value are not being carried out by the system. That would be the argument. Now, if that's true, what you'll see in the PowerPoint slideshows going forward, is this a war on the poor? Is this a fight against poor people and their crime? Or, the next slide, is it a war on people of color? If you look at who's most likely to end up in prison, it's poor black men, poor Hispanic men. Is there some kind of interactive effect between social class and race that affects how we fight the war on crime? Is it race and class? And then it's difficult to disentangle these two because they're so closely related. If you remember from earlier in the semester, I showed you that relative to white people, people of color, blacks and Latinos in particular, have lower incomes, less wealth, they're more likely to be poor, they're more likely to be unemployed, right? Their children have significant disadvantages. So it's hard to say, well, say if you go back to Michelle Alexander, she says it's a war on black people, but if you go after black people, you're going to catch poor people, right? Go back to Jeffrey Ryman's argument, it's a war on the poor. If you go after poor people, you're going to catch black people because there's a close interaction between social class and what we call race, right, and ethnicity. What we can say is that most of the bias in criminal justice is not from individual people. It's structural. It's built into the structures of America. So we talked about two of those structures, two of those institutions, the media and the law. So the law defines crime and serious crime. The media focuses our attention on those. So remember the spotlights. That's what focuses our attention. The law focuses our attention on some acts, the media on some people and some acts. And therefore, that's what the system goes after, right? That's institutional discrimination. It's in the institutions. You also have the contextual discrimination that we talked about all semester, where there's discrimination seen in some contexts, but not others. Sometimes, some places, but not others, right? We talked about that all semester. So we know that individual discrimination exists, but it's not the major problem. The major problems are institutionalized and contextual discrimination, okay? Now, given this, what can we do? What can we do to change these structures and institutions to make things more effective at reducing crime and to make things more effective at achieving justice? You'll see these reforms discussed in your book, pages 209 to 214. Okay, some of these ideas that I just put forth. First thing I want to point out is we have a federalist system of government. Federalism can definitely hinder social justice. So what federalism means is states have rights in the United States to do the vast majority of things that our governments do. What the federal government can do is very limited by law, by the Constitution. States have their own budgets. States have their own highway system. States have their own educational system. States have their own tax system, right? On and on and on. They have their own police forces, their own courts, their own correctional facilities. We are seeing the effect of federalism, if you want to think of what's happening now in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. States are hindering the ability of the government to achieve consistent results because some states are opening again, some aren't. Some states are allowing counties to make the decision, some aren't. So you can imagine if this is a true pandemic where people are spreading it to each other, we need a centralized government, the federal government, to establish one rule so that we can control this. If some people are going to the beach, it's going to spread there, right? Some people are going to movie theaters, bars, restaurants, it's going to spread there. that will then come to the rest of us as we interact with those people. Okay, if that's true, then think about reducing crime and doing justice. If we allow states to do their own thing. Well, you know from U.S. history that states, especially in the South, have historically, for what, 100 years more than 100 years, resisted efforts by the federal government to bring about equality. It's happening now, even in the South. Even today, at least through the Obama administration, the Department of Justice was fighting states in the South just to uphold people's rights to vote. There were efforts to restrict people's right to vote. In your lifetime, in your state, we looked at North Carolina as an example of that. So keep that in mind as you go through the potential reforms. Here's my argument, and you don't have to agree with these, but these are just ideas. I think we should, number one, focus on procedural justice over retributive justice. Remember, retributive justice is retribution, getting even with criminals. It's definitely important. It's an important part of justice, especially when you're harmed by someone. But procedural justice is upholding everyone's rights. And if we believe in equality, then we need to make sure we protect procedural rights. You saw throughout the semester that efforts to fight crime often result in less equal justice. The more that we focus on crime control, the less we focus on due process. Therefore, the more we fight crime, the less equal we become. And you've seen that based on who's being incarcerated in the United States. I also think, obviously, we need to increase the representative nature of lawmaking. You saw how the law is biased in favor of some interest based on who writes it, who funds it. Since criminal justice just carries out the law, then any bias that's seen in the law will be seen in all of criminal justice. This is innocent bias. So you see that mostly wealthy white people have their voices heard, and their interests are thus logically the most served. So the acts that they commit that are harmful, those acts of elite deviance, are largely ignored because those are the people who are making the law. So we need to make sure that people from all different groups in society are lawmakers. That's easy to understand. It's not easy to do. That requires getting more people of color into law school and into the industries from which lawmakers come. That's no easy thing to do, and people disagree about how to do it. But in order to have a more effective and representative law, we need to get more people of color involved in making it. Okay, this one I don't think is arguable. What if we define crime and serious crime not based on who does it, but based on the actual amount of harm it causes? So count bodies, count dead bodies, count injuries, count property loss. The more bodies, the more injuries, the more property loss, the more dollars lost, the more serious it should be, don't you think? So instead of focusing on street crime exclusively, why don't we focus on the white collar corporate crimes and elite deviants that actually do the most harm? And actually, if we do that, not only will we have more justice in society, more crime control, but we'll also have more fairness because we'll have a more representative population in prisons relative to the people that are actually doing the harmful acts. They'll match. For example, you have more wealthy white people in prison, just as a silly example. In other words, fighting white collar and corporate crime will actually also achieve greater equality in society as well. This is a hard one to do. The next one is to eliminate for-profit media corporations. As long as the media are making money off of their crime coverage, they're going to cover what sells, not what we need to know. So right now, as a citizen, you can invest in nonprofit media corporations, I should say, like PBS, NPR. There's liberal ones, there's conservative ones as well. But the point is, there are already some nonprofit media organizations out there, and they do a much better job in terms of their coverage of crime. How do you do this one? I'm not sure, but if we're going to hold the white collar and corporate offenders responsible, we need to focus the attention of police on those matters. Right now, police are focused almost exclusively on street crime. And if we focus on elite deviants, we'll catch more wealthy white people, we'll catch more harm producers, and so we'll have more equality in society as well. Now, how you do that, I'm not sure. It's a whole new police academy, right? We need like accounting majors, and that's what the FBI likes, right? Computer experts, people who can go after these elaborate crimes that are committed financially. I also think we need to rebalance the criminal courts in favor, more in favor of the defense, or at least have a balanced playing field where the prosecution doesn't have all the power and the resources, because this is why 95% of people who are accused of felonies plead guilty. Spend more money on criminal defense, and I actually even said we should abolish peremptory challenges. Remember, peremptory challenges are those challenges where you eliminate a juror for no valid reason. We know these are being used to discriminate against people based on race, including in North Carolina, including in death penalty cases. You see that on the slideshow I made about the death penalty and the video I made about the death penalty report I wrote about the death penalty. Google it, how peremptory challenges are being used in the death penalty against people of color to remove them as jurors. Why don't we just eliminate that and say, if you have a good reason to eliminate someone from a jury, go ahead. Otherwise, they stay on. I also argue that we should refocus on corrections. We still call it corrections, so we might as well do it. Currently, as I mentioned before, we use our prisons just to incapacitate people, but we should be rehabilitating them, right? Vocational training, educational training, drug treatment, etc., if needed. Actually make people better before you let them out. I said the death penalty and the drug war were failed policies, so the final recommendations would be just abolish them, replace them with something else. So with the death penalty, I prefer life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Commit murder, you never get out. While you work, every dollar you earn goes to pay to either the victim's family or a charity of their choosing, what have you, okay? That's called life without parole plus restitution. A majority of North Carolinians currently support that. I also believe the drug war should be ended based on the fact that it's a failed policy. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to legalize drugs. That's beyond my pay grade. You guys will decide how you vote, what happens there. But I do think we need to replace the drug war with medical approaches. Drug use is one thing, relatively harmless, produces more benefits than harms. Doesn't mean we should endorse it or approve it. But when it becomes drug abuse, that's when the government plays a role, and they can play a role by providing medical treatment to get people off of drugs if need be. Most people that use drugs don't become abusers. Most people won't need this benefit. With all the money we're saving by not fighting a war on crime, we can actually use it to provide drug abuse treatment for people who need it. Now, these are just ideas, okay? Now, these are ideas that flow directly from the research, from what apparently should work, and they're meant at eliminating or reducing some of the problems that have been addressed in the class. You don't have to support them. They're just ideas. Maybe you have some of your own. If you'd like to share them, send them to me. Maybe they'll appear in the next version of the book, the next edition. Send me some of your ideas for making things better. We can have a Zoom meeting to discuss it, or you can send me some via email, what have you. All right. Let me know if you have any questions about this material, and don't forget your final exam. I'll send you a reminder. Your study guide is already on there, so you can start preparing. Do your best. Remember, this is 30% of your grade, so you need to spend some time on it. All right. Peace. Keep well. I'll talk to you guys soon.